right, welcome to Engineering for Themed Experiences. And to start off today, I'd like to let you know that you are behind schedule and over budget. And I had just heard a moment ago that there are going to be massive sweeping creative changes to the project. So I hope you're ready for a redesign. Has anybody left yet? Okay, no, right? So that means you're good candidates to be in this class. It's probably, you can stay. So the topic in this class is how to be an engineer working with creative visionaries and other designers to communicate an organic idea to the audience. That's a pretty big sentence. But that's what we're doing in theater and in themed entertainment. And really, that's actually what we're doing in any project that we're working on. There's always some kind of communication that has to happen. And there's always some person that wants that communication to happen, and there's always some audience trying to listen to that communication. So that's fundamentally, in the entire show, the business that we're in any framework. But it becomes particularly important in entertainment and in themed experience design because the needs analysis structure of how you go about this sort of thing really shifts. The way we teach needs analysis for classic AV design is, falls apart a little bit in this domain. And so people who are working in the technical disciplines or working in engineering need to be able to shift their thinking a bit into a new way of approaching this. And what's different is we now have this creative team that behaves somewhat differently than a traditional project. So how to be successful at this type of work means having a sense of context of what it is that you're doing. And also understanding your role in that bigger picture as an engineer, because that shifts a bit. And then also how to go about that. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to spend quite a bit of time on understanding the sense of context of what it means to be a technical person in the middle of what is fundamentally a creative environment. So what is it that's happening here? The fundamental thing that's happening is we are telling a story. And so that's really our starting point as technical people in this discipline is understanding what the story is. And we're gonna, compared to what engineers are traditionally accustomed to doing, we're gonna start at this very high abstract level of what's going on and then slowly zoom in toward something that is technical. But technical is almost the most minor thing that we do in this entire process. It's the very last step is getting to any technology whatsoever. Because what's more important than the technology is the nature of the show. So this is one of the primary things that distinguishes engineers who can work in creative environments and engineers who struggle to work in creative environments. The engineers who are successful in creative environments are understanding of the story, are sympathetic to the story, and are always working in a positive way to support the telling of that story. So I'm going to say that a lot today. The word story is going to come out of my mouth more than any other word, because that's the shift. And more than the technology, if you can get that into your mindset and start from a place of supporting the storytelling, then a lot of the other things are actually going to fall into place quite naturally. It really kind of turns things upside down because we're used to being technical people. And being technical people means that we have a tendency to skip ahead. And skipping ahead to, well, I want to know what this is, and even I want to know what speaker this is, I want to know what projector this is, I want to know, and we're trying to make things. And the shift is to let go of making things for a while and just try to imagine what the impression is supposed to be. So start with why we're doing this and work toward the impression, and then work toward technology. But that's last. That's really the most important thing I could say all day is technology is at the bottom of this process. So I've put up here, the engineer is part of the storytelling team. And that's also an important mindset shift, right? To believe that even though you're not the person with the creative concept, and even though you're not the person who wrote the story, you are still a valued integral part of what is basically a collaborative art. So a collaborative art form means that you have multiple people that contribute to its success. And you are now one of those people who are contributing to its success. And that shifts the way that you have to think about it. I'm spending a lot of time on this. Does that make sense, right? And does that seem at all different from what you do, the way you might think now? Or is that, for the people that have experience in this, is that sounding familiar? Yeah. It's hard to get the creative team to think like a creative team. So. To let the engineer on the creative team. Yeah, so that's, I'm glad you said that, right? Because as engineers on the creative team, there was always one guy that I worked with who always walked through the office and said, "Thou shalt not art direct." And always reminding us that even though we are, and remember, we're part of the storytelling team, but we're part of the storytelling team in a supportive role. We have our contributions. And I'm really glad you said that, because our contributions are still very black shirt. We're not the people being seen, and we're not leading the artistic direction or even making any artistic decisions most of the time. But in our own little quiet way, in the things that we have control over, we are. And we're doing it in ways that the creative team doesn't even actually notice or perceive. But we have within our discipline great latitude in order to nudge things in directions that support the vision. And if you nudge things in a direction that contradicts the vision, it's going to get noticed. And if you nudge things in the direction that support the vision, nobody's going to know. So we live in the thankless profession that way, but it actually, the best we can do is stay employed. Because if you go the other direction, they're like, call in the new engineer, right? So I mentioned just briefly that that this way of thinking, we're talking about it specifically in terms of entertainment, but it really applies to every discipline. And that's because, everybody's got an act. I heard that line. I watched The Greatest Showman, and the investor, comes in to look backstage, and the trapeze artist comes over to the investor and says, "What's your act?" And he says, "I don't have an act." She's like, "Everybody's got an act." And that's true. And it doesn't really matter to us whether the storytelling is true or the storytelling is fantasy, and it's not even necessary for us to distinguish whether it's true or whether it's fantasy. We're still going to support that storytelling all the same, no matter what the topic is. So if that is corporate branding, there's a message to be communicated. If that is house of worship facilities, there is a message to be communicated. And our role in thinking about how to communicate that message always works. So some keys to creating illusions, which is what we're doing, right? If we're telling a story, then it's necessary to take the audience and transport them into some kind of fantasy world where they're not in the environment that they're in. We are transporting and transforming. So that means in whatever venue the experience is taking place in, we have to no longer believe that we're in that venue. We have to believe that we're someplace else. Generally, in the communication of the message, there's going to be something that could potentially change about the person receiving the message. So this is transformation. People, when they go through some kind of experience, they come out the other end with some kind of knowledge that they didn't have before, or they come out with some kind of emotional impression about the world that they didn't have before. And they leave and they go home and they still have this residual effect of either knowing something new or feeling something new that may or may not have been a part of what they were aware of before they walked in the door. So that's very, ethereal. But in order to accomplish that, it's very tricky. And accomplishing that means we're having to put them through this experience that creates an illusion to the extent necessary to accomplish what we're going to do. And the reason I'm telling you this is because this is another contextual setting and a contextual framework in your mind for how to go about engineering design. If you're remembering that this is what we're fundamentally doing when you're doing engineering design, it's going to change the way you choose technology, it's going to change the way you interact with the other team members, and it's going to change the way that you deploy that technology. Because you're always going to be thinking, it's important not to destroy the illusion. And it's often the case where engineers get into conflict with creative teams because engineers are doing something that makes the creative team think the illusion is getting damaged, and the engineer is digging in against practicality or physics or reasonableness or budget or something. And so there has to be a balance between maintaining the illusion and striking the proper amount of intrusion into the experience with the technology. And this is critical. This is another thing where people who work in this business, if the creative team can't work with a given technical team, it's oftentimes because they're destroying their illusion, and then they have to shift. It's a key point to staying employed. Can I ask for a glass of water? That I don't have to stop. Thank you. So in here, so creating the illusion means the willing suspension of disbelief. So people are, even though they're in a different environment, right? This is basic filmmaking. People, are, even though they're in a different environment, they are able to imagine that they're not. Provided that we give them enough cues of where they actually are, and provided that we don't distract them too much. So, some of thank you so much. Some of the principles that we look at here is that of immersion, right? So immersion means how many different senses are we trying to cover to produce this illusion? And so how much of the visual field are we trying to cover? If they turn their head, does the illusion get broken? Can they face backwards and the illusion doesn't get broken? How completely surrounded are they by this experience? Have we covered all of the senses? Are there things that they can touch that are part of this experience? Are there things that they can smell that are part of this experience? And how many things contribute to their experience being complete? So that means looking for distractions that could pull someone out of this environment. If you talk to a lighting designer and they're lighting a scene on stage, a lot of times, what people will do, what lighting designers or directors will do, is they'll look away for a moment and they'll look up and see where their eye goes to first. Because the lighting, again, is supporting the storytelling, so it's drawing your focus to where you need to look. And if the lighting is out of balance, then you'll look someplace different than you're supposed to be looking. And so you'll see lighting designers do that. Sometimes you'll see lighting designers look through their eyelashes to kind of fuzz things up and see where the brightest spots are to kind of blur things together. Those are the types of things they're looking for. They're looking for things that distract from the illusion or pull your attention into a different direction. So of course, what that means to us is, if a lighting designer is so concerned about distraction that they'll fuzz up the stage and look for a spot that's slightly brighter than another spot, imagine what happens when we put a loudspeaker, or a projector, or a camera, or another device into the visual field. So that it's tremendously distracting, which means we have to be aware of not doing things like that. Another method of creating illusions is breaking down the isolation between the show and the person. And this is a very powerful method. It turns out if the show environment can affect your world and vice versa, then it's much more powerful. And you'll see this in theater, like if you're in a proscenium theater where the stage is framed off. A lot of times they'll build the set work so that it creeps around the proscenium and out into the room where there might be some vines that go up into the ceiling of the room. And that's what they're doing. They're providing a visual cue that your world is not separated by this dividing line. Your world is part of their world. And when they break that line, that's very dramatic because that means you're not watching a show. The show is potentially part of you. And it's subtle, but it's a really big message. And some number of years ago, one of the most dramatic impacts of this was when Universal Studios, this was a long time ago now, Universal Studios opened the Spider-Man attraction, right? And so they had a motion-based ride, and they had a video. And so you're riding through this attraction, and Spider-Man jumps down off of a building, lands on the hood of your vehicle, and your vehicle dips when the Spider-Man lands on it, and then talks to you. And it's like, that guy just moved my car, right? So now there's not such isolation between you and the show. That is stunning, right? Because you don't think that your worlds can cross over. You're in the Matrix land there, right? The other thing we have to know about creating illusions is something about, because we're dealing with people, is something about physiology and perception. So to the greater extent that you can understand how humans perceive things, and there's two components to that. There's the physiology components. We have physical sensors. We have eyeballs that are sensitive to certain frequencies of light. We have ears that are sensitive to certain frequencies of sound, and they have limitations. They behave in certain ways. Like when I walked in here and saw the video lights, my first concern was I can't see the expressions of all the people beyond the tables. And that's going to now be a barrier for me because I'm usually watching people's reactions while I'm presenting. And now that I've stood up here for some time, I can still see the expressions of some people in the front row, but the people in the back row are still a little splotchy. So this is important for technical entertainment system design to understand the limits of the eyeballs, because it's a very common production of illusion to mess with people's ability to see. And if someone experiences a bright light, they actually can't see a certain amount of detail for a period of time until they adjust. And so that gives you a certain amount of time to do something that they can't see. And this is the basis of a lot of illusions. For us, it matters to keep track of, now I've been staring into the lights telling that story and I can't see my screen. For us, what matters is that when we're trying to hide equipment, it's another thing to think about is that you can put things behind a plane of light and nobody's going to see past that plane of light in order to see it, right? So this is another valuable tool. Understanding perception means you can support the illusion. Uh-oh. And so I've been saying this, several different ways, but it's also important. We talked about this kind of in terms of individual components, but not in all of them working in concert. And all the design elements speak together to support the communication with no contradiction between each other. Now that means that there's never an opportunity lost to tell the message. It doesn't matter what it is, It doesn't matter if it's an actor. It doesn't matter if it's a flower pot. It doesn't matter if it's sound. It doesn't matter if it's lighting. It's contributing to tell the story and move the story forward at every given moment. And if any element is not contributing to moving the story forward, it's being wasted and it's potentially distracting. So I remember the first time I learned this lesson as a sound designer in college. It was necessary to take a scenography class, an introduction to theater, which included costuming and scenography. You had to learn something about every discipline. And so we were required to do a set design. And this was for a streetcar named Desire. And so in a streetcar named Desire, you've got this, this southern, rural setting, and she comes to the door to answer the door, and I had a screen door drawn in. It seemed like something in the humid South like this. People picture on the bayou, somebody's got a screen door in the front of their house. And just like almost all screen doors, my screen door opened out. And the instructor was like, okay, it's a streetcar named Desire, and this is a seduction scene. She's trying to get him into her house. If she's trying to get him into her house, and the first thing she has to do is a gesture that pushes him away, that speaks against the action of what we're trying to do. So the door, when she answers the door, has to swing in. From the very moment that she greets him, if it's seduction, this is seduction, right? So it's very subtle, and it's a design element that I didn't even think about had anything to do with the story, but it matters because everything speaks. The set speaks, the lights speak, the audio speaks. Everything always speaks. Okay, so this is where I'm going to stop talking for a while because I'm certain I've done enough for a bit, and I'm going to let some groups of people here talk together. So if you're at a table, you can talk amongst yourselves. If you've got a group over there, you can talk amongst yourselves. Just turn to each other. Maybe this group can be together. If somebody is feeling lonely, could come up here to one of these tables. Find a small group of people, and I want you to talk about the creative team that you're going to be working with. And these exercises are put yourself in their shoes. We say that a lot in life, right? Imagine yourself in the other person's shoes. And it's a fun phrase to say, but it's extraordinarily difficult to do. And it's easy. One of the reasons we're doing this is it's easy for the technical team and the engineering team to have criticisms of the creative team or have misunderstandings with the creative team or get into conflict with the creative team. And so to try to see the other side of that, we're going to imagine for a moment what it's like to be the creative team. So talk amongst yourselves, and I'd like you to ask each other, what may be the characteristics of a creative personality? What types of people are these, and how are they? What are they trying to do? What are their goals? And what are the things that would frustrate them? So imagine the personality, and just like all things in theater, right? We're going to frame everything in the positive. So everything you have to say about them is good, right? What are some of the ideas that came out around this? Well, let's start with this group over here. Well, I've got a thing.
I always wanted to use this. Is this working?
It truly is.
We kind of just spitballed some experiences we had with creatives. We're all kind of from different perspectives, but I guess certain characteristics would be for creative is like they might be driven to have to express their vision. Sometimes it might be for financial reasons, but there might be other reasons for it. So there's a lot of different reasons that they might bring their ideas out.
Yeah, motivations. Yeah. Motivations for doing this line of work, right? Strongly driven, need for expression, might have a financial interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else? Can I throw this?
Yeah, you can throw it. It's a catch box unless you're me, and then it's a drop kick box.
More kind of what they came up with too is they're limitless.
Limitless.
Yeah, because how their vision, they might not know restrictions on their vision or how to create an illusion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They're limitless and they don't know restrictions. And right, because thank you for phrasing that in the positive, right? Because we often see that as very frustrating, and not understanding technology and ridiculous in their requests, right? But in their world, they're trying to create something that's never been done before, right? We're dealing with artists, and in order to do something that's never been done before, you can't put so many restrictions on yourself, right? It actually, the thinking is limitless. That's where it all starts, and that's how we get to these amazing experiences. That's the basis for amazing. Ooh. Boy, I'm not made for this arrangement, am I?
Well, we kind of thought of the same thing. We didn't call it limitless, but say they don't care about technology. Like for them, a good creative person is like dreaming. He has an idea. He wants to convey an idea or a feeling or educate people when it's like a museum type experience, but in theme parks it's more like to convey a feeling of having fun, but then they have either it's dinosaurs or whatever, but they have no limit technically. They just, like I say all the time, guys, after they're finished, I let them go through all their ideas, and then I say, well, okay, I'll try to find some sky hooks to make it work.
Right. So that's an important strategy. You beat me to the punch on one of the primary bullet points that I promised this class. And so what did you just say?
Yeah, let them go all through their ideas.
Let them go, right?
Yeah. I learned that the hard way. When I started, I was thinking, come on, guys. It's like makes no sense. Then butting heads with the creative team after a while. I said, well, you guys are right. Let's put it out there, and my role is to find solutions.
That's right. Your role is to find solutions. So this is one of the main takeaways of this entire session. Is that when creative people want to do things that are limitless, you let them go. Your role is to find solutions. And it's not necessary to butt heads with them because it's going to resolve. You don't actually have to worry about it. And this is one of the hardest things for engineers to do is to let go of things that don't make sense or that might be impossible. Because it's the natural tendency of engineers to minimize risk. Right? We want to optimize, we want to make things possible. And when something's going to be impossible, sometimes we start to panic, right?
That makes this work so much fun.
Right, and that
they're completely on another planet.
Exactly. That's the fun part of it. So if you let it go, some things that happen are they change their mind, and you never have to argue with them about it. Right? Yeah. That happens a lot. Almost everything that is almost everything that's stressing you out is probably going to change. So you can wait out almost anything. And a lot of the things that they're asking for, they're describing in such a way that sounds impossible to you. But when you show them what you can do, they're going to say, "That's exactly what I wanted." And they're going to be none the wiser, right? They're going to actually think you broke the laws of physics, which is going to make you a magician. So it's better to not butt heads. It's better to just keep going. The answer is, if you're.
I think the key answer here is just, they're very creative.
Yeah, it's the nature of it.
They dream, and you just let them, say what they have to say.
How about who else wants to talk? Who wants the box next? You had a lot to say in the group.
Yeah, we talked about the two toughest things you said, which we run into every time, physics and budget.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's always an issue. We break from the theatrical model that you alluded to earlier, and we actually have tried to insert ourselves as a company in the creative process.
Uh-huh.
We work with a small group of highly creative people, certain companies that we've aligned ourselves with, and they get us in as part of their creative measure. We find it helps with budgets, and it helps we can value engineer what they're trying to do, and we actually think that that breaks from the typical theatrical model where you have art directors and lighting directors, you know, the whole deal. And we get in on the front end, and our clients seem to love it, and it works well.
That is fabulous. What a dream configuration to be able to be actively included in that process. I think that's probably the rare case, right?
It is a rare case because we're looking at usually projects under $1 million. And, you know, I know a lot of things are multi-million dollars, and that would have more of a consultant-driven top end and
Yeah.
down, as opposed to the kind of things we do.
Yeah, that's really great. And there's, you know, for organizations that are, you know, designers of themed experiences that are houses that do this, you know, I've certainly worked with people that have an R&D division or a technology research division, and there is a cross, you know, relationship with that. Usually, I've found that people that are on the specific experience design level, I'm going to design this thing, are subject to the creative team. It sounds like you're involved where, you know, well, you're involved where you get to do that. Where I was going with this is there's oftentimes a technical research group who knows what challenges the creative team has traditionally faced and is continuing to face, and they know what technological barriers they've run up against that prevent them from doing something they want to do. And they're off working on developing technologies that solve storytelling problems. And those groups will then come back to creative teams and say, I've got this thing, and here's how I think it could be used in 3 different ways. And a lot of times the creative team will go, oh yeah, I can use that. That's a thing that I could use to tell a story, and they'll adopt the technology, so it'll go that direction too.
That's a good point, but, you know, I actually don't like the thoughts of saying engineering isn't creative.
Yeah.
Engineering is as creative as it gets in there.
Okay, we have a catch box to this guy.
I feel it's both sides of the or both sides of the same coin, but there's this divide that you know, we got to find a way to meet in the middle and play nice and shake hands together. But sometimes it can be difficult to do that because we have such, through our training, we have different ways of approaching things. I think, I know when I try to work in a creative process, I try to step outside of my technical training and try to remember to be creative and to use my technical training to be creative. And I think it's no less creative than being on the other side of the conceptual creative part. And it's all part of a whole, but we just, you know, there's this imaginary line that we just seem sometimes to get stuck behind, and we gotta find, it's gotta be a semi-permeable barrier. We gotta let it cross over it. And sometimes we forget that.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great
it's
way.
an entire creative process. And when, you know, people say we're technical, and I say, well, yeah, we're technical, but we're being creative with it. It's not, we're being any less creative. We're just, you know, it's just being creative, but with technology.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's, yeah, that's how and I just, sorry. But yeah, that's how I feel that it's a whole entire creative process, and it's just trying to get across that divide and support each other. I think it's, I know a lot of creative people feel that the technical needs to support the creative, but I feel it can be more of a reciprocal relationship. We can support each other. And I find when you get that kind of relationship and that kind of respect on both sides of the creative side of the, you know, of both sides of the process, I think then the whole thing kind of gels together and everyone could kind of feel that, you know, we're supporting each other, and the energy is go back and forth across that divide.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Is it? Everybody got that one? That's a great
I'm going to throw
pearl.
this down.
Yeah,
No, I'll just hand it.
it's fun. Anybody have another comment that they're itching to get out? So that was great, and I appreciate the clarification, and I don't want to leave the impression in the things that I said that I'm contradicting that in any way, right? Because it is. There's this imaginary line, and we're kind of on one side, and somebody's kind of on the other side, but everybody's got to reach over.
I consider myself more of an artist.
Yes.
As I'm just my palette is technology.
Yeah.
My medium is technology.
It,
I'm
it,
just a different kind of artist than, as someone who's more of a, I guess, a conceptual artist. I'm kind of more of I'm a more practical, but I'm still creating something that's I think is art.
right.
My medium is different.
Yeah, exactly. He says he feels rather than being, and the divide is rather than being the conceptual artist, that he's an artist within his media, right? So his media is technology, and he's being an artist with that technology, and that's absolutely true.
And that's how I approach it. That's how I feel about it. So I don't feel any less creative than what other people are called the creative team.
Right, and so that's an unfortunate side effect of vocabulary in the industry, right?
Sometimes it rubs me the wrong way. No, I'm a very creative person myself, and I consider myself an artist.
Right.
My tools aren't trying to paintbrush or I'm not a dancer or an actor. My tools to express my creativity is technology.
I hear you. I hear you, because I feel exactly the same way. I've always found this division of nomenclature tremendously distressing, right, for my contribution. Yeah, I agree completely. That's a great way to put it. So before we leave this and move on to the next one, one of the characteristics of someone who's trying to do something impossible or new or fresh is that they may be worried that it's not going to be. There may be some fear around that. And that fear could get stirred up if they're hitting barriers, right? And so that's one of the reasons there can be tensions, is if someone is a naysayer in the room against something when they're trying to do something original, that can feel very threatening, and that can feel very, very disturbing. And of course, frustrations would be that that they're not making progress on something that they're trying to do. So to the extent that we can help them move things forward and contribute, terrific. So now we have. We're going to do the same thing and do a little more talk around the production team. So the people that are actually implementing this. So we've gotten past the design phase. Now we're into the people who are, actually the designers under the conceptual creative direction, which really you are part of, right? So you're producing the drawings that are going to be the audio system, the video system, the special effects system, and the show set designers are out there detailing the set. The rock work designers are out there, detailing all of that, and everything's, so we're in effectively the equivalent phase of design development if it were architecture, but the concept is now gelling into the things we're actually going to build. So all of those people, what are they trying to do in their frame of reference, and what would their frustrations be? And I'll let you talk in your groups again for 5 minutes. Who would like to share anything that they thought of? We won't necessarily go around the room to every group, just whoever has something. Look, I can be trained.
So the production team, they're trying to execute the vision, and the frustration there is they're having to take that vision without mutilating or destroying it and force it inside the box of reality. But then at the same time, blurring that box, making that box invisible while still staying within its constraints, which real world are what's physically possible, what's technically possible, and what time and budget say are possible. And then also other side of that is then when one of those things won't budge, having to go back to the creative team and deliver that bad news of, so this isn't going to work, whether it's time-wise, budget-wise, physics says it doesn't work, and work with them, tell them, like, hey, you've got to adjust your vision.
That's it. That's right on, right? Yeah. Thank you. So of course, what that means to us is if they've been struggling with that challenge, and they're pretty far down that road, and they think they've finally got it worked out, and their stress level's starting to go down, and you introduce a new element into their world that they now have to accommodate, it's going to be extremely difficult for them. And that speaks to workflow and timing, that when you have a technical element that needs to be integrated into another design element, then they need to know about that really early. Because if they haven't started to draw anything yet, and they're still thinking about how am I going to do this, and they're thinking about all of their other constraints, if they have your constraint in their mind at the same time, you have a better chance of it being integrated gracefully. This is in conflict with, you probably don't know what you need to put in the design element yet. You probably haven't determined the exact size of that thing or even selected a component yet. And so it can be incredibly valuable to start with a wide level of abstraction and zoom in as you go during the project. Don't wait until you know what you're doing to tell other people what you're planning to do. Begin, if you know that I'm going to have to put a loudspeaker in a designed element that's going to have to get some sort of artistic concealment, make sure that person knows and draw a rough size box that you think, and even if you don't know what it is, say, there's going to be something about this size that goes here, and this has to be acoustically transparent. And that means long before you do traditional drawings or mechanical drawings or installation drawings or anything else, you've taken some piece of conceptual artwork, that might even be photographs that are impressions of what you're going to do, and you've drawn a crayon box that this is a technical thing. And give that to those people. That's one of the working deliverables in the path that will really ease people's work, other people's work, and improve your ability to get your elements integrated. All right, we'll do this one more time, and this should be the easiest one, right? So now we're going to cover the personality of the engineer and what they're trying to do. So I'll let you talk about that for 2 minutes. Does anybody know anything about this topic? This table does. What do we know about engineers?
We spent a little bit of time talking about the importance of understanding the boundaries in which the engineer can operate, right? There's a desire to produce something creative. There's probably an easy propensity to try to leverage new technology and the solutions that we see here on the show floor and integrate and create something brand new, to your point about being a creative engineer. But then there's the realities of the constraints that you have to operate on, right? And so how do you compromise and how do you iterate? And the frustrations may be the realities in which you have to operate.
Yeah, right. Yeah, trying to match to constraints. Who else? Yes. This is going to be good.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges of an engineer is you can get caught in between the creative team and the production team, because creative teams leaning on the engineers to fulfill their vision, and then the production team is counting on the engineers to fulfill the vision, but to do it on time and on budget. And when the creative team and the production team are at odds with each other, the engineers can be caught kind of in a tug of war, and it can be very frustrating and just drive you crazy, because you can't win and you can't please everyone. You got to find out, where does the engineer stand in the whole thing, and where do you hold your ground? Because the engineer wants to be able to have work that they can stand behind. And if you get, your work as an engineer can get endangered if you're trying to please everyone. And then you can be put in a position of, you just can't make anyone happy. And that can be a very, very frustrating position to be put in if the creative and the production team can't kind of, work out what it is, what they want, and how they want to get it to accomplish it.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, what he just says is kind of what comes back all the time is really, most of the time we have to value engineer. Like, we can do anything, or almost, but when there's no budget, if you have a budget, then you have to please the project manager, please the client, and you're designing to do the best of what the creative people imagine, or what you've imagined also in that creative team. But often you're stuck with having to value engineer, and that's where keeping the high quality or the effect that you want to have there as a company or as the creative team idea, and making it work in the real world. That's
Yeah, so getting trapped in these dilemmas, especially against budget and against conflicting problems.
Production manager just at our constant odds with each other.
Yeah. So.
If they're warring all the time, it just wreaks havoc.
Yeah, or someone else in the team is having a war, so you have no chance of being accommodated because there's no audience for what you care about, right? Yeah, so these are very real problems. So one of the levers, I mean, you really only ever have one lever as an engineer, and that is the needs of the project, right? So you can argue physics all day long and nobody will listen to you. But if you argue the needs of the project and the vision, you'll get a response. And this is why we've spent so much time with you understanding the story, understanding the creative vision, and understanding how they want to tell this story, because that's your only lever, right? And you, to the extent that you are forced into a budget problem, what you tie that back to is, I understand, or and there's very gentle ways of saying things, right? And if you can frame it in non-threatening language that is not presumptuous or attacking, and say it in a way that you're innocent and supportive, right? So that basically means you can always ask an innocent question and not be threatening, as long as it's a truly innocent question. So if you're up against a budget problem, you can go back and say, my understanding is that what we're trying to accomplish here would be, and in order to achieve that, it's necessary, this is how I think this would best go, but it requires that budget. I can't make this accomplish something this vision doesn't match this budget. We have to. How important is it to you that this happens in the story?
As an engineer, you have to also be a negotiator. You're negotiating.
Yeah.
You can't, you've had engineers like you before that you can't negotiate or struggle in this process.
Right. You have to. He said, as an engineer, you have to be a negotiator, and the way that you negotiate is you don't say, I can't do this, and you don't say no, and you don't say that's impossible. You always come back to this loop of clarifying where what it is you've been asked to do fits into what they're trying to accomplish and how badly they want it. And because your budget is gonna be proportional to how badly they want it. And we as engineers aren't actually tied to the idea whether they want it or not. Maybe, oftentimes I've often gotten caught in the trap of I was asked to do this, so I have to. And I've when verifying it, it's like, that doesn't matter, it's cut, right? Like I was trying to get a bunch of money for something that was a C priority. And if you go back, insistent that you need this money for something that's not actually, you look kind of ridiculous, right? It starts to look like you're not understanding the story. That's why I always come back with the passive questioning, the passive language of, well, what is it we're trying to do here? And I can think of one where there was like an island with sort of a river cruise kind of waterway around it, and there's ambience on that island, right? So there's jungle ambience on the island, like crickets and frogs and stuff, and then I hear someone say, well, and then the people on the opposite shore looking across the river to this island can hear a tiger roar once in a while. Like, okay, you have now just crossed a threshold, right? I had loudspeakers this big in the bushes over there, and they now believe a tiger roar is going to come out of that, right? And it's going to be heard 100 feet away and sound like a tiger. Okay, that's now a cabinet like this. That's not going to happen. But so the way to deal with that is, okay, a tiger roar is significantly bigger than a cricket, and I can make that happen for you, and this is what I estimate the effort will be to make that happen for you. And they'll be like, oh, we don't care about tiger roars, or what, or they may be like, and I've seen it go the other way too. I've said, yes, I can do that, and pulled up the train of ridiculousness that it's going to take, and I'm like, I am so free of this once they see that, and they're like, I'm gonna get that money. And then I'm like, oh no. So, try. Yeah, it's like, okay, I mean, there was, yeah, I mean, we're not supposed to tell war stories, but I could. What's that? There's a lot of, yeah. Or it's actually the hinge point, right? It's like in the impression they're trying to make in the audience, that is, that's the PowerPoint, right? If the audience gets hit with this impression, they're moved, so they need it. I mean, they absolutely need it, and they can't tell their story without it. And then the money comes, right? But don't be afraid to ask for big if you think it needs big. Again, framing in the positive. We're always moving it forward in the positive. We can do anything as long as we're in alignment with the needs. The needs are your lever. So I have some bullet points around successful engineering, which is really just all the things we've been talking about. Clarifying your understanding. So when you're trying to find out what's going on, nonviolent language, there's a great book actually called Nonviolent Communication. There's a lot of books on nonviolent communication. And it's incredibly useful, if you want to read up on this, it's incredibly useful in dealing with collaborative art form communication and team communications, because it teaches you the phrasings that I was just using. It teaches you how to say things that could potentially be high conflict in non-threatening ways. Because no one can attack you if you're asking a question that you don't have, an emotional attachment to. And as long as you stay in that world, you can maneuver with people who are volatile and not trigger them. And that's key, right? Yeah, it keeps track of unknowns and assumptions, and we're about to do an exercise that's to give you some experience in doing that, because that's really critical. There's going to be a lot that you don't know when you're designing in artistic environments, and there's going to be a lot of things that change. And so that level of abstraction, the nebulosity of this, is going to start out very wide and then get very specific, and then once you have it all worked out, it's going to move over here, is what's going to happen. And closely related to that is successful engineers make progress regardless of what they don't know. This is a very, very common engineering mistake, is to stop work. until you find out. If you stop work until you find out a piece of information, you're never going to finish. And it tricks people into thinking they can't proceed. Like if you hit a barrier that you're like, I couldn't move past this because I don't know, it's like, okay, there's 7 other things you could move forward with. Move forward with all of those things and leave a circle around this, but don't stop, keep going. Identifying risks and beginning early mitigation on those risks. Almost every problem that you face is easier to solve and less expensive to solve if you have time. When you find out about something and you have to fix it in 2 weeks, you've got a problem. If you're starting a project and you have months to think about how you're going to deal with this, sometimes you can head it off without actually any expense at all. And so the key here is you need to think about in this project, what are the things that are my big unknowns and uncertainties? What technologies haven't I worked with before? What product is new that has maybe changed or I don't have experience with? What are the chances that my technical solution is actually going to satisfy the impression that this person is trying to make? And so we start thinking of mitigation strategies, right? So if there's risk like, all right, I've never actually used this device, can I get one in and get it on my desk and start playing with it and seeing that it does what I actually think it does, right? So we can buy down our risk by something like that. If I'm using a technique or a technology that I'm not sure is going to satisfy the creative intent, then we get into doing things like mock-ups and proof of concepts in order to buy down risk and in order to progress things forward. So it's oftentimes necessary to show the design team an actual representation of what it is that you're trying to do, sufficient to produce that impression. And a lot of times we'll build things just for that purpose and build systems just for that purpose temporarily. And that's important. Early mitigation, which is, the next slide. Because you want to do mock-ups. Sometimes the creative team, maybe I should stop using that word. What should we call the creative team? Because now that's like really stuck in my head because I have exactly the same frustration you do. It's like, well, I'm wildly creative. I hate that they get that word. But sometimes the creative team will order the mock-up. They'll be like, we want to do this scene, or we want to do this this particular thing, and they'll build it in a warehouse or in a conference room or something. But sometimes you need to initiate it. Sometimes you need to go, this has to be seen. Like anytime something's tugging at you, like when I show this to them when we build it, if I think there's a chance that it might be rejected, like there's a choice to be made here, then I better show it to them. And I think I was out at a project once, and we just had regular pre-show video monitors up. And so video production walks in and they've drawn all of these little wispy nebulas, and they completely flattened into the display, right? I mean, first off, black was gray in the display, and all of the variations of these wispy nebulas turned into like a spirograph or something. It didn't look beautiful at all. And I had no idea they were coming in with this media. But that's one of those things. It's like, well, oops. but that could have been easily mitigated if we had found that out before. Another characteristic of successful engineering is anticipating and planning for expansion and change. I said you're gonna zoom into your exact design, and then it's gonna sidestep. Or at the last minute, they're going to add things. So don't optimize too much. It's okay to leave capacity in your system. It's okay. This is one of the characteristics of engineers, right? They like to optimize things. If they've got things come in like multiples of 8 and on the audio world, like there's an 8-channel thing, a 16-channel thing, a 32-channel thing. Engineers will be like, if I have 15 channels, I'll buy a 16-channel thing. Well, don't buy a 24-channel thing. Always leave buffer, or leave the possibility for buffer, right? So if you're only going to have a 24-channel thing and you've got a card cage, you've got slots for more 8-channel things, and you're like, okay, what if somebody added something to this show? What if somebody added something to this show at the last minute? How much spare capacity do I have right now, and how much spare is this thing modular and scalable? So thinking about not boxing yourself in is important. And because you will need to be able to respond to changes in concept, from minor to extensive. So this is a slightly different concept on successful engineering. Here at Infocom, right, we have a huge training program around CTS certification and a body of knowledge and recommended practices and rules of thumb, and for the bulk of the industry that we do. In entertainment design, we're probably going to need to break some of those rules. The rules of thumb aren't going to apply anymore. And that's because you're going to be asked to do things that are impossible. And if you're going to do things that are impossible, the rules of thumb won't matter. You're going to have to go one level deeper than the rules of thumb. And so a good starting point to do that is to take all of the reasons or all of the rules of thumb or all of the best practices that you already know and put one level of questioning underneath them. Ask yourself if you know why that is a best practice, and ask yourself if you know why that is a rule of thumb. So if we're looking at projection or display size and resolution calculations versus viewing distance and viewing cone, it's good if you know the formulas for that we teach regarding basic decision making versus analytical decision making and how that works. And so for entertainment design, I'll ask you to explore that one level deeper. Do you actually know, in addition to those calculations, how those calculations came about and why we have them? Because what you're going to need to start doing is, when you're asked to do something outside the box, you're gonna be asked to break the box. And you're gonna have to break the box in a way that still works, right? Is this making sense? Yeah, good. So it's a level more detailed.
That's the fun part about being
Right, the fun part of,
is that you get to do those kinds of things, whereas in other things, you can't ever step outside the box.
yeah, that's the fun part of being an entertainment engineer, right? You're allowed to step outside the box. And you're always allowed to step outside the box as long as you know what rule you're breaking and why you're breaking it, and that it's okay to break it. Otherwise, every rule can be broken. And you'll be asked to do ridiculous things, right? So you'll be asked to have floor to ceiling video displays at very close viewing distances. And there's nothing in our literature that tells you what the resolution of that needs to be. And you're going to have to get to that based off of what it is that is being displayed and what the impression is going to be, right? So all of these things are now subject to the fun. And because just like the standards aren't written for all of the things you're going to be asked to do, neither are the products designed to do all of the things that you want to do. Because all of the companies out there in the show floor are designing things that can be deployed to the mass market and sold in great quantities. Many times unique experiences in entertainment, there's no product for what you're trying to do. So you're going to have to take another product and you're going to have to repurpose it and make it do what you want it to do, whether or not it was intended to do what you're doing. So what that means is, just like you have to retranslate the standards into where does this come from? You have to retranslate all the products on the show floor into what are they actually doing and how are they actually doing it. Because if you understand what they're doing, then they become a paintbrush for something else that you're going to need to know how to do, right? If you go out to the show floor and there's a company that's got projection systems that has a camera, and if you put two projected images next to each other and they have overlap, and it's got a camera that can see the overlap, and it does automatic edge blending, right? So it figures out the taper and all of the digital signal processing characteristics that have to happen, and line those projection images up. Great. Okay. So that's one application for that technology. So when I look at that, I'm thinking to myself, well, how does it do that? What algorithm is running in there? And I see it as the elements of what makes it do that. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a camera that can see color. There's a camera that can, and I'm using an example that I actually don't even know how it works, but it's the one that comes to mind. So I would probably want to start researching how they do that. What is that algorithm doing? How is it detecting that? And then I'd start to think about what else I could detect with that. If I've got a camera system that can detect brightness and color to the point where it can balance it, what happens when I'm in some sort of entertainment situation and I need a sensor that can detect some kind of video activity that's going to happen, and then I need to take some kind of action on it? And then I'm going to look around and I'm going to go, okay, well, the major manufacturer probably isn't going to repurpose their light blending engine for my thing, but there's this other company over here who also does edge blending. So I wonder if I could get their box and make it talk to a control system. If I could ask it what color that thing is, I could, evaluate. Somebody's doing, a guest has their own painting experience, and I can tell what color they've chosen and if it's in the right place or not in the painting, right? Just not that that's at all practical or reasonable, but you get the idea. You want to start using things differently than they were intended. It's been some years ago. The very first time I saw. One of the manufacturers introduce a video head tracking algorithm, right, for video conferencing. People are walking around the room and this thing's identifying faces and moving the camera. It's like, well, that's great for entertainment, right? If I can identify where a performer is and I have their lateral information, that's fantastic. And then somebody came to me and said, well, we want to understand our conference room usage better. And traditionally what we have are these devices that track conference room scheduling and booking. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, we've got a camera in there that can track faces. Why don't we count how many people are in the conference room? And so I'm asking the video conference manufacturers, can we ask through the control port, can we ask it how many faces have been in the room all day? Or can I poll it and ask how many faces are in there every hour? Or how could I figure out conference room usage based off facial identification? They wanted to use it for tracking people around the room, and I wanted to use it for usage data. And lo and behold, this year on the show, what do we see? There's at least 3 AI systems that use video data to develop conference room metrics. So these are the kind of thought processes that you start to get into in order to be successful in this business, because you have to say this isn't a device that does what they say it does. This is a device that does this function, and I now had somebody ask for something that I can use this function to solve that problem. And there's the fun, right? Because that's way fun. So the artists have drawn this for us, and this is what we have as our input. So I'll need an estimate for that. That's pretty much all the direction you get. There's a few points to this exercise, and one of them, one of them is that we oftentimes get input that is difficult to understand what it actually means to us. Another one is we oftentimes have to proceed in the face of abstract information. And another one is we need to be able to recover and continue to work with the information that we've generated. And as engineers, we like to know things, and a lot of times we can't know things. So this is an exercise in not knowing and proceeding anyway. And so I'd like you in your group to imagine what this means to you as an engineer, and just come up with a list of the major technical elements that are going to go into this show and what you think they're going to cost. And any assumptions that you've made based on a lack of information, which you definitely have, is a lack of information, you're going to write down, just keep a little running list of what it is you assumed this is going to be. This is hard, right? To try to come up with something, especially with no sense of meaning, no sense of, I didn't tell you the story, I didn't tell you what role this plays in the story. But I left all of that open so that you could get used to generating your own questions. In the face of, in the face of lack of information and in the face of abstraction. And I heard a lot of people around the room asking great questions about what it would be. And some people, still had the urge to ask me a question about what it was going to be. And my answer in every case was document your assumptions. Just figure out what you think this is, write it down, come up with what you think that the price of that is. And because you're going to go back and verify it. There's somebody's going to tell you how close you are to what's going on, or more information is going to be forthcoming. You're going to be sitting in a meeting and you're going to find out something and you're going to go, oh, that bird doesn't move. Or you're going to go, you're going to find out a sense of scale. I heard someone wanted to do this as a miniature golf. That's certainly true. I can think of at least one theme park that has this as the centerpiece of the entire park. So that could be true. And we really don't know. But scale, these are good questions, right? Scale matters. So the sense of scale is an important thing to get a grasp on. And when you're looking at things on drawings, even architectural drawings, it can be really deceiving. You can look at something and go, oh, that'll take like 5 loudspeakers down that strip, and then you put a scale on it and you realize it's 3 football fields long. And it's like, and because they drew this design element that was a big oval, you imagine it's this, but it's like, no, who would build an oval 3 football fields long? But somebody did, and it threw off your sense of perception. So keep track of scale. So of course it doesn't really matter what answers you came up with. What matters is that you came up with an answer. What matters is that you didn't get tangled up in not knowing. What matters is that you know what you don't know, and you're going to keep track of what you don't know, and you're going to look for ways to fill that in as you move forward. That's what matters. And that as an engineer and someone who likes precision, you are willing to accept the unknown and you are willing to guess. It's a big thing that you're willing to guess. So a lot of these, we're going to speed through some of these slides because we've talked about it anyway. And we'll just see. So, we get down to after you understand the story and why the story is being told and how the story is being told. So this slide was more about the volcano is more about how the story is being told. It's like, what are these actual elements? Does the bird play a role? Does the volcano play a role? Is the water real? What impression are we trying to make and why? And then which of those design elements have to come alive in order to give that impression? And so once that happens, then we start getting into the technology. It starts getting closer to that. We're translating that vision into material elements. You can take that picture and divide it up into, yes, there's fire effect. Yes, there's water effect. This thing makes sound, all of that doesn't. This has an ambience. Notice we're still not into loudspeaker make and model. We're still not into how we're going to create the nighttime image on the volcano. We're not into any of that stuff yet. We're into technical elements, but we're chunking it. And then once you have it chunked, then the final last step is to apply the technology to that chunk. So we now know that there needs to be jungle ambience around the volcano. We now need that bird has to be heard, but it only has to be heard by the people standing directly in front of it. It doesn't have to be heard any further away. Now we can start choosing what it is we're going to use to solve that problem. And that's really our final and last step, is choosing the technology. And then once we know that, we can, we've already talked about this, right? We can communicate our requirements to the other disciplines that we need to cross-coordinate with. And sometimes this can be relatively difficult to figure out because in show situations, sometimes there will be an architect that's designing a building or infrastructure, and there will be set designers and prop designers and other people designing elements, and there will be interior designers. So maybe your stuff goes in the architecture, maybe your stuff goes in the interior design, maybe your stuff goes in a prop, maybe your stuff goes in a set, and consequently, you have to develop communication channels with all of those different people depending on where your equipment falls. And you're going to have to provide different input to different disciplines. So that's different than architectural design, where we're only dealing with the architect. And we talked about giving information early in the process so that they can at least space allocate and know what's coming. And we do that in architecture already, but sometimes we don't think about it on the component level. In the schematic design phase of architecture, that's when we tell them we're going to need this much power load, this much heat load, and this much equipment floor space in square feet, but that's all we tell them. So it's the analog to that in high visual design, that you'll go to the prop maker and say, well, we're going to try to put a speaker in here, right? So that's who needs what. So a good habit to get into is every single time you go to a meeting on the project that you bring a binder or OneNote or whatever you like to use, and you take minutes at the meeting for every single thing that you are directed to do, or every single creative decision that has been made. Because there will be a lot of things that are debated back and forth and discussed and decided one way and then changed and then decided another way and then discarded. And I guarantee it's going to become impossible to track the decision thread. And it's very, very easy to end up designing something that was discarded. And not only for you, but it's very, very difficult for everyone else to track the decisions they made. Sometimes they'll forget the reason they made the decision, and then they'll skip back to where they were before. And if you can go back to your journal, and you're like, I'm pretty sure we decided not to do that. And if you can go back in your journal to, well, we had a production meeting on this day, and well, then we said we weren't going to do it because, and again, you don't have to be adversarial about it. You can use the question again. I have in my notes, innocently, we decided we were going to do this because, but is that still true? Do we still feel like that? Or do we want to go back the other way, right? Because then we're not digging in around it. We're giving option and opportunity, and we're saying why it is we think this is true. But if you don't have that journal, you're going to get lost. I can guarantee it. We talked about this, right? Breaking the laws of physics. When someone asks you to do the impossible, you say yes, exactly. And then what you do is you go away, you figure out exactly what it is you can do, and you bring it back, and they'll look at you and go, that's exactly what I wanted. It's the best solution ever. And we talked about this last one too. If you get frustrated, bring the topic back to the needs of the design, because you are going to have to resolve, you are going to run into conflicts that have to be resolved. It's not like you can say yes to everything and it's magically going to happen. You have realistic constraints, and you're negotiating and you're balancing, but you're always moving it forward in this innocent questioning, verification kind of way. So we have 10 minutes left in the session, and I did promise you some very practical things. So I'll tell you the things you can use today. We spent most of the time on the philosophy and the psychology of this because that's what's really going to help you over the long term. And here are some ways that you can get your stuff into the design relatively easily. Visual concealment. Contrasting versus matching patterns. It's extremely difficult to conceal something and make the pattern match. It's almost always better or easier to conceal something by making a contrasting element. So if you have this wall, right, with this style, and you need to put a speaker on the face of one of these columns, it's going to be really, really hard to make a square cutout in a white surface like that and put a speaker behind it. But if somebody were willing to make some purple diamonds on each of those columns and you made them all out of the same perforated metal and you made them all purple and you put a speaker behind two of them, it's going to look like it goes in the design because it's a contrasting element rather than a matching element. So contrasting elements are your friend. It's very, very hard to make things look seamless. It's one possibility, right? People don't always go for it. Natural pattern line breaks. If there's a design that's got this, right, this Infocom slide design, see those diamonds up there? The crisscrossy diamonds and things. So if you need to put a speaker behind this painted pattern, you're not going to cut a rectangle here. You're going to make this shape out of perforated metal, right? That entire shape. Because then you're not going to, because your discontinuity is going to match the line next to it, right there. So your eye is going to be less likely to pick it out if you match natural breaks, right? Excuse me. Pay attention to your light direction. Remember, things that are lighted from behind tend to appear translucent, or you can see through them. Things that are lighted from the front tend to be opaque. So if in theater we have scrim material. If you hang a drape that's relatively light weave, you can light it from the front, and you won't see the presenters back there. And then you see this a lot in staging, right? The big reveal is they turn down the front lights, they turn up the back lights. You can see through it, and the panel appears. They've been sitting there all the time. Sometimes they use that in awards shows to conceal the orchestra, and then sometimes they feature the orchestra, and then sometimes they make the orchestra go invisible. They're doing that with a scrim. So if you think about when you're trying to hide things and putting them behind things, think about which direction the light's coming from in order to hide it. Acoustic transparency. So if you're trying to put audio through things, which is a very common thing that we have to do, one of the things you can use is acoustically transparent fabric. Not all fabric is necessarily acoustically transparent. And a first good, easy way to check is to blow through it. If air doesn't go through it, sound doesn't go through it, I guarantee. You might be able to blow through it and it's still not terribly acoustically transparent, but at least you have a chance, right? And that's any material. If air doesn't move, sound doesn't move, for the most part. There's exceptions. Printed fabric. You can now go to Rose Brand. I think in New York they make a lot of theater supplies. They will print anything on acoustically transparent fabric. You can send them any piece of artwork and it comes out their machine in any size. So up to huge, right? So if you need to pattern match or you need to have a highly designed visual hidden thing, printed fabric's a great way to go. Perforated metal. So there's a paper that I think I have a link to in here by Theodore Schultz called the Acoustic Applications of Perforated Metal. And he gives you in this whole paper how sound goes through perforated metal. And you can use the formulas in this document to determine if the frequency loss that you're going to get through the perforated metal is appropriate for your application or not. Generally, it has to do with two different things. It has to do with the percent open of the total material and the hole spacing. So you can imagine hole spacing matters because if you have a a 50% open acoustic material, it could be one hole with a half circle, and the half circle's covering your tweeter, right? So that's 50% open really bad. But if you have a lot of holes closer together, you could be 30% open and be really good. That's how that works. You might be able to put things behind moving panels or on lifts. Ported subwoofers. You know, sometimes you can not have to put a giant subwoofer in a space because there are designs, you know, that all you actually need is the port, or actually, you know, the tube coming out of the subwoofer, and so you can put the mass of that like in something and just have a little exit without having a gigantic thing you have to hide. And also column array loudspeakers like these that are on either side. These are, you know, very useful in that you can oftentimes match visual elements by something that's tall and narrow rather than something that's boxy. So just a couple tips on putting things places. Which brings us to the end of our session. We have 5 minutes left, and I think I've given you everything that I've promised you in the course description. And at this point, I'll leave it open to if I didn't, or if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, I'm open to hear anything else. Anything else? No questions? Of course, yeah. Yeah, what is my background? No, my background is primarily rooted in theater. I studied theater engineering. It's a hybrid interdisciplinary degree at Purdue University. So I started off studying electronic engineering and theatrical sound design. So I was primarily a sound designer, and I had to learn video as a course of my career development in the AV industry. I went to work in theme parks for the first time in my college internship as a stage technician, and then I ultimately worked for Walt Disney Imagineering in Glendale in theme park design, where I was for a number of years. And then I started a freelance consulting business where I was contracted back to be technical director on the new park openings for Hong Kong Disneyland and for the design of Shanghai Disneyland.